The day they sealed my cabin gate was the day they sealed their own fate. At 6 a.m., Delilah Pemberton directed workers to pour concrete completely around my gate posts, blocking all access to my property. $500 daily fines if I tried to break through their security barriers. She stood there smirking, thinking she'd finally won this HOA power struggle. What Delilah didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that they just trapped themselves. See, their fancy HOA development only has one road connecting to the highway. Every inch of that road runs through my private land. While they were sealing my gate, they were actually cutting off their own escape route. 47 families, one way out, and I own every foot of it. 3 months later, she'd be begging me not to leave them stranded forever. But right now, she thinks she's untouchable. What would you do if someone sealed your driveway? This gets insane. My name is Marcus Brennan, and 6 months ago, I thought losing my wife was the worst thing that could happen to me. Then I met my new neighbor. I inherited 40 acres of Montana wilderness from my grandfather, including a rustic cabin and one detail that would become crucial: a private gravel road connecting my land to Highway 12. The sound of tires crunching over that gravel had been the soundtrack of my childhood summers. In 2019, developers built Pineview Estates around my property. 47 McMansions marketed as luxury mountain living with convenient highway access. Those sales brochures promised easy commutes, but forgot to mention that convenient access meant using my private road without permission. The original developers had some handshake deal with grandfather about being neighborly, but handshakes aren't legal documents, and when they sold out, the new HOA just assumed they owned everything. For 4 years, nobody questioned it. Then Delilah Pemberton bought the biggest house in the development and immediately started her reign of terror. At 49, Delilah embodied everything I hated about suburban power trips: designer yoga pants that cost more than my monthly groceries, a white BMW she parked diagonally across 2 spaces, and that condescending smile she flashed while explaining how the world should work according to her vision. She became HOA president within 6 months, promising to elevate community standards and protect property values from declining influences. The cabin workshop smelled like cedar shavings and motor oil, scents that reminded me of grandfather's hands teaching me to build things that lasted. After Sarah died from lung cancer 2 years ago, those weekend retreats kept me functional. I'd arrive Friday evening, spend Saturday morning with my tools, then sit on the porch listening to water tumble over creek stones. That peace lasted exactly 14 days after Delilah's coronation. She appeared in my driveway with a clipboard and that shark smile, declaring my iron gate aesthetically incompatible with community vision. The gate had protected our property since 1987, but apparently it offended her refined sensibilities. "We need cohesive design elements," she announced, tapping manicured nails against her clipboard. "Something more upscale. The HOA has pre-approved contractors for appropriate fencing upgrades." I politely explained that my gate sat on private property, not HOA jurisdiction. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes went dead cold. "Oh, sweetie, geography creates mutual responsibilities. We'll work this out." 2 weeks later, a county inspector showed up investigating illegal structures and environmental violations. Someone had filed a complaint. The inspector found nothing. Grandfather built everything to code, but the harassment message was crystal clear. At the next HOA meeting, the rumor mill was already spinning. Delilah had whispered that I was difficult and potentially unstable due to military trauma. She suggested my gate created security vulnerabilities and hinted that veterans sometimes struggle with authority. The smell of cheap coffee and nervous sweat filled the community center as newer residents avoided eye contact. They'd bought into her narrative about the crazy hermit threatening their property values. But 20 years as an Army Corps engineer had taught me about petty tyrants. They mistake volume for authority and assume everyone else lacks backbone. Delilah was textbook, all bluster, no substance. The real escalation came on a September evening, thick with the sound of cicadas. Delilah knocked on my cabin door, clipboard in hand, demanding I attend mandatory community meetings to discuss my compliance obligations. I explained slowly, like talking to a child, that I wasn't an HOA member and my property wasn't subject to their fantasies. She actually laughed. "Geographic proximity creates legal obligations, Marcus. Your little hermit act ends now. When I refused, she filed another county complaint claiming my road access violated existing easement agreements. Pure fiction, but harassment disguised as bureaucracy. That night, surrounded by the scent of pine needles and Sarah's favorite lavender candles still flickering on the mantel, I opened grandfather's surveyor case. Brass instruments gleamed in lamplight alongside yellowed property deeds and legal documents. If this suburban dictator wanted war, she'd just picked the wrong engineer. Time to show her what 20 years of military legal training could accomplish. Delilah's declaration of war came with a clipboard and an army of bored housewives. She'd organized something called the Community Beautification Committee, her personal squad of yoga pants enforcers armed with measuring tapes and Pinterest dreams. Within a week, they were conducting voluntary property assessments throughout the development, documenting anything that didn't match their vision of mountain luxury perfection. My gate topped their hit list. The formal letter arrived on expensive letterhead featuring some pretentious mountain silhouette logo. Mandatory appearance required screamed across the top in bold red letters. According to the committee, I was guilty of unauthorized rustic styling, failure to maintain aesthetic harmony, and my personal favorite, geographic non-compliance with community vision. The smell of fresh ink and legal intimidation wafted from the paper as I read their demands. Show up to their meeting or face escalated enforcement action. I didn't show up. Delilah's response was swift and vicious. She declared my gate a public nuisance and filed another county complaint, this time claiming my road access violated mysterious easement agreements that supposedly existed somewhere in the development's legal paperwork. That's when I stopped playing defense. 3 nights later, I sat in grandfather's workshop surrounded by the musty smell of old leather and yellowed documents. His surveyor case contained 40 years of property records, and what I found made my pulse quicken like Christmas morning. The original 1987 land deeds told a story Delilah had never bothered to research. My family had never granted any easement to anyone. The gravel road cutting through my property was entirely private, built, maintained, and owned by 3 generations of Brennans. Every car that had used it for 4 years was technically trespassing. My old Army buddy Jake Morrison specialized in property rights law back in Helena. When I faxed him copies of the deeds, his callback came within an hour. "Marcus, this is bulletproof. They have 0 legal right to use your road. You could block access tomorrow and they couldn't do squat about it." But I'd learned something about strategy during 20 years of military service. Sometimes the smartest move is letting your enemy think they're winning while you prepare the perfect counterstrike. I decided to offer Delilah a reasonable solution first, partly because I'm not naturally vindictive, but mostly because I wanted documentation proving I'd tried to resolve this diplomatically. My proposal was generous beyond what they deserved: a formal easement agreement for $1 per year, plus a mutual respect clause requiring HOA consultation before any changes affecting my property. It would legalize their road usage and end the conflict. The informal meeting happened at the community center, that sterile room that always smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stale coffee. I laid out copies of the original deeds alongside my proposed solution, explaining how this arrangement would protect everyone's interests. Delilah's reaction exceeded my worst expectations. She scoffed at my extortion attempt and accused me of manufacturing a fake crisis to justify greed. According to her warped logic, 4 years of using the road had somehow created established community rights that magically overrode actual property law. She'd convinced herself that possession equaled ownership, like a legal 5-year-old. "You can't hold an entire neighborhood hostage over technicalities," she declared, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, but Delilah's personality dominated the room like toxic smoke. She rallied them against their hostile neighbor, who was supposedly threatening community welfare with legal facts. That meeting ended with Delilah promising to escalate through appropriate channels and deliver consequences for obstructing community progress. I discovered what those consequences looked like 2 days later. Surveillance cameras. Motion-activated security cameras now pointed directly at my property, documenting my every movement like I was public enemy number 1. Delilah had also begun photographing my truck, my gate, even my garbage cans on collection day. The constant click and whir of camera mechanisms became the new soundtrack of my weekend retreats. But here's where Delilah's paranoia became my golden opportunity. While researching her camera installation permits, I stumbled across something fascinating about Ms. Pemberton's real estate business. During my Army years, I'd helped investigate housing fraud cases, so I recognized the pattern immediately. She'd been selling Pineview Estates properties to buyers with promises of guaranteed highway access via well-maintained community roads. Her marketing materials specifically highlighted convenient transportation infrastructure to justify premium pricing. 3 houses sold in the past year alone, all with inflated prices based on road access she legally couldn't promise. Back when I'd worked with military legal teams, we'd seen agents lose their licenses for exactly this kind of material misrepresentation. The irony was beautiful. While Delilah documented my every breath, she'd been committing actual fraud. I started my own documentation project that night, trail cameras capturing every vehicle from her development using my private road. License plates, timestamps, frequency counts. Every school bus route and pizza delivery became evidence of organized trespassing. The familiar crunch of gravel under tires now sounded like future lawsuit settlements. Delilah's next move proved that desperation makes people stupid, but stupidity with money makes them dangerous. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick as a small phone book and smelling like expensive legal intimidation. The HOA board had voted to hire Crawford, Mitchell & Associates, downtown's most expensive law firm, to handle their property access dispute. Their retainer alone probably cost more than most families' vacation budgets. The threat letter was a masterpiece of legal theater. 40 pages of fancy letterhead essentially boiling down to, "Surrender your property rights or we'll sue you into poverty." They claimed my road usage materially interfered with community development and demanded I grant permanent public access or face eminent domain proceedings. Pure bluff, but it told me everything about Delilah's mindset. She'd convinced the board to gamble their entire operating budget on her personal war against reality. While she burned through legal fees, I spent my evenings doing something more productive, hunting through public records like a bloodhound tracking fresh scent. Back during my Army days, I'd worked with JAG officers investigating housing fraud near military bases. The pattern was always the same: agents promising amenities they couldn't deliver, inflating prices with fictional features, then vanishing when buyers discovered the truth. Delilah's sales record fit that template like a custom suit. 3 properties sold in 18 months, all marketed with her signature promise: premium highway access via established community transportation corridor. Her listing photos literally featured my private road, captioned as community infrastructure. She'd been selling my property as an HOA amenity without my permission, knowledge, or any legal right to do so. But here's where my research struck gold that would make a prospector weep with joy. One buyer had already filed a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Commission about misrepresented access rights and fraudulent marketing materials. Apparently, when their moving truck got stuck on the narrow road sections, they'd started asking awkward questions about maintenance responsibilities and legal easements. Questions Delilah couldn't answer because the easements didn't exist. The complaint was public record, buried in state bureaucracy, but accessible to anyone who knew the right filing systems. And 20 years of military paperwork had taught me exactly where to dig. I filed my own detailed complaint that same afternoon, documenting how Delilah had systematically misrepresented property features to inflate sales prices. The State Real Estate Commission takes fraud seriously. Agents lose their licenses permanently for selling amenities they don't control, especially when buyers pay premium prices based on false promises. The irony was delicious. While Delilah hired lawyers to threaten me, she was already under investigation for actual crimes. Her next escalation confirmed that panic makes smart people act stupid, and stupid people act catastrophically. The petition campaign launched the following week with military precision and all the subtlety of a circus parade. Community petition to establish public road access appeared on every doorstep, complete with emotional manipulation disguised as neighborhood solidarity. Delilah organized door-to-door visits, armed with talking points about how my obstructionist behavior threatened property values and emergency access. She positioned herself as the community hero fighting against a bitter veteran who wanted to hold innocent families hostage over legal technicalities. The psychology was clever: frame me as the villain, then ride in as the savior. Several neighbors signed immediately, probably without reading anything beyond the emotional headlines. But a few started asking uncomfortable questions about why they needed signatures if the HOA actually owned legitimate access rights. That's when I made my first public countermove, and it was beautifully simple. I installed professional trail cameras along every section of road crossing my property. Not hidden surveillance, but obvious equipment with bright reflective warning signs. Each camera captured license plates, timestamps, and vehicle counts from everyone using the road. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Suddenly, every resident's daily commute included visual reminders that they were crossing private property without permission. The cameras didn't just collect evidence. They made people confront the legal reality Delilah had been denying. Within days, 3 families knocked on my door asking quiet questions about easement agreements and property boundaries. Word was spreading through the development like wildfire. Maybe their HOA president didn't actually understand the legal mess she'd created. But instead of cutting her losses, Delilah decided to go nuclear. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my military service, personal finances, and family history. If legal intimidation wouldn't work, character assassination would become Plan B. The PI lasted exactly 4 days before quitting in frustration. Turns out there's not much scandal in the life of a retired engineer who builds furniture, pays taxes on time, and keeps his lawn mowed. The investigator's final report probably read like the world's most boring biography. But Delilah's desperation was showing, and desperate people make increasingly stupid decisions. Her stupidest decision yet involved attempting to bribe a county inspector to find code violations on my property. The inspector immediately reported the bribery attempt to the county attorney's office, triggering an ethics investigation that could result in criminal charges. That evening, sitting on my porch listening to creek water babble over smooth stones while the scent of pine needles filled the mountain air, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Delilah was no longer fighting me. She was fighting reality itself. And reality always wins eventually. Saturday, September 15th, 6:47 a.m. The sound that yanked me from sleep wasn't my alarm clock. It was the rumble of diesel engines rolling down my private road like mechanized thunder. I stumbled to the kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in my hand, and witnessed the most audacious act of property theft in modern suburban history. 3 cement trucks, 6 workers in hard hats, and 1 very satisfied HOA dictator orchestrating the whole operation like she was pouring the Berlin Wall. Delilah Pemberton had finally revealed her true nature, and it was uglier than wet concrete. The emergency HOA meeting had happened 24 hours earlier, a hastily called session where Delilah convinced 3 board members that my trail cameras constituted surveillance terrorism, requiring immediate action. According to the minutes I'd obtained later, she'd painted a picture of residents living in fear, children afraid to play outside, property values plummeting because of my psychological warfare tactics. The vote was 4-0 to install temporary protective barriers around the security threat. Eleanor Martinez, the retired paralegal who might have asked inconvenient questions, had been conveniently excluded from the emergency notification list. Now I was watching democracy in action. 4 people voting to steal 1 person's property rights with Portland cement and rebar. I dressed quickly and stepped outside, phone recording everything while the acrid smell of wet concrete mixed with diesel exhaust and Delilah's cloying perfume. Professional crews moved with practiced efficiency. This wasn't some spontaneous neighborhood project, but a carefully planned military-style operation. Delilah stood near the work zone, designer travel mug in one hand, clipboard in the other, checking off items like she was managing a corporate construction project. When she spotted me approaching, that predatory smile stretched across her face like a knife wound. "Good morning, Marcus," she called out with mock sweetness dripping from every syllable. "Don't worry about the little construction project. Just temporary safety measures while we sort out your attitude problem." I asked the crew foreman about building permits. He looked nervously at Delilah, who waved her manicured hand dismissively. "HOA maintenance doesn't require individual permits, sweetie," she purred. "Everything's been properly authorized through legitimate community governance, you know, the kind of authority you've been ignoring." Instead of arguing, I thanked each worker personally and slipped them $20 bills for coffee. Their confusion was beautiful, the supposed neighborhood villain treating them with more respect than their actual employer. While Delilah supervised her concrete masterpiece, I made 3 strategic phone calls. County building inspector. "Someone's pouring unpermitted barriers that block emergency vehicle access. I need immediate response." Jake Morrison. "They just sealed my gate with concrete. No permits, no legal authority, and they're about to discover why that was the stupidest move possible." My insurance adjuster. "Property damage in progress." Can you document everything before the consequences hit? But here's where Delilah's master plan revealed its fatal flaw, a mistake so catastrophic it would make military strategists weep with laughter. Those concrete barriers didn't just block my access, they blocked everyone's access. The HOA development had exactly one road connecting 47 houses to the outside world, and every inch of that road crossed my private property. By sealing the choke point, Delilah had just created the world's most expensive suburban prison. Reality struck the first victim at 7:30 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Patterson from Unit 23 stood beside her Honda Civic, staring at concrete barriers that left maybe 14 inches of clearance on each side. Enough space for a bicycle, but her car might as well have been a semi-truck trying to thread a needle. The school bus arrived at 7:45, air brakes hissing like an angry dragon as the driver tried to process what he was seeing. His radio crackled with increasingly frustrated calls to dispatch. Route 47 blocked by some kind of wall? I got 30 kids and no way through. By 8 o'clock a.m., the HOA parking lot looked like a refugee camp for stranded commuters. 7 families trapped in their driveways, honking horns in a cacophony of suburban panic. 3 delivery trucks backing up in confusion. One very unhappy UPS driver demanding to know what idiot built a fort across the road. That's when the beautiful truth finally penetrated Delilah's delusional bubble. She'd assumed I would panic, hire my own crew to remove the barriers, and essentially pay to clean up her mess while surrendering my property rights. In her twisted logic, this was checkmate, forced me to choose between permanent isolation or complete capitulation to her authority. What she hadn't considered was the possibility that I might grab a lawn chair, crack open a cold beer, and simply enjoy the show. The morning sun warmed my face as I settled in to watch 47 families discover they were now prisoners in their own luxury development, courtesy of their elected representatives' brilliant strategic thinking. Emergency vehicles began arriving within minutes, fire marshal, county inspector, sheriff's deputy, all responding to reports of illegal obstruction of public safety access. Delilah tried explaining her temporary safety measures and community protection protocols, but reality was crashing down on her like those concrete barriers collapsing on her own head. She'd just trapped herself and every neighbor she claimed to defend. Suddenly, her master plan looked less like tactical genius and more like the greatest strategic blunder in HOA warfare history. The county fire marshal's violation notice was nothing compared to what I discovered in grandfather's forgotten papers. While Delilah screamed at emergency responders about her legal authority, I retreated to the workshop where dust motes danced in morning sunlight streaming through grimy windows. The familiar scent of sawdust and motor oil calmed my nerves as I opened grandfather's leather surveyor case, the same case I'd avoided for 2 years since inheriting it. Most documents were routine: property surveys, tax records, maintenance receipts yellowed with age. But beneath 40 years of accumulated paperwork lay something that made my pulse quicken like I'd struck gold. The original 1987 developer agreement, signed in fountain pen ink that had faded to sepia brown. My hands trembled as I read Section 14, subsection C. The legal language was dense, but the meaning hit me like lightning. Emergency access easement requires explicit written permission from original landowner. In the event said access is obstructed for a period exceeding 72 hours, developer shall pay penalty of $10,000 per day to landowner until access is restored. I read it again, then a third time. The developers had inserted this clause as protection, ensuring future landowners couldn't arbitrarily block access and strand their investment. But legal contracts work both ways. If anyone blocked that access, they triggered the same financial consequences. And every obligation in that developer agreement had transferred to me with the property deed. The workshop suddenly felt electric with possibility. Jake Morrison's reaction when I called was everything I'd hoped for. "Holy shit, Marcus, this is a thermonuclear legal weapon. They've been in breach since Saturday morning. Current penalty assessment is already $30,000 and climbing." But the beautiful part was just beginning. I spent 20 minutes researching HOA finances through public records. What I found made me laugh until my sides ached. Pineview Estates HOA total assets, $40,000 in operating and reserve funds combined. At $10,000 per day in penalties, they'd be bankrupt before the weekend. Even better, their own bylaws included personal liability clauses. Board members who voted for actions that financially damaged the association could be held individually responsible for losses. Delilah had just voted herself into personal bankruptcy along with 3 other families. The irony was so perfect it felt like divine intervention. I walked outside carrying copies in a manila folder, my boots crunching on gravel while chaos continued around the concrete barriers. Stranded residents argued with Delilah, delivery trucks backed up in confusion, and the school bus driver was calling his supervisor to report a road closure emergency. When I approached the crowd, conversations gradually died. Something in my expression must have communicated that everything had changed. "Delilah," I called out, my voice cutting through the morning noise. She turned with that familiar shark smile, clearly expecting another desperate legal threat. Instead, I handed her the developer agreement and pointed to Section 14. "You've been in breach of contract for 78 hours. Current penalty, $78,000. Your HOA's total assets, maybe $40,000 if you liquidate everything." The smile died like someone had switched off a light. "That's impossible. We have authority to—" "You have authority to bankrupt every family in this development," I interrupted quietly. $10,000 per day, compounding. You'll exceed your assets by tonight. Personal liability kicks in after that." I watched her face transform, confusion melting into disbelief, disbelief crystallizing into pure terror as the mathematics penetrated her consciousness. For the first time in 6 months, Delilah Pemberton had absolutely nothing to say. The silence stretched like a held breath while 47 families realized their elected leader had just gambled their homes on a game she couldn't win. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted. And the best part, this was only the beginning. The terror on Delilah's face was just the appetizer. Now came the main course, building a legal trap so perfect she'd spring it herself. That afternoon, I filed formal demand for penalty payments with the HOA board. Certified mail, return receipt requested, exactly 7 days to respond before legal collection began. The thick envelope felt satisfying in my hands, official and final as a judge's gavel. While Delilah processed her financial nightmare, I was already engineering her complete destruction. Jake Morrison explained the collection process over beer at Murphy's Tavern, our conversation mixing with the clink of bottles and sizzle of burgers on the grill. "Property liens are your nuclear option," he said, sketching on beer-stained napkins. "File a simple form with the county recorder, pay $50, and suddenly you own a piece of every house in their development until they pay up." The elegance of lien law made me smile. Once I attached liens to HOA properties, those debts would follow homeowners forever. They couldn't sell, refinance, or transfer ownership without satisfying my claim first. It's like having a mortgage on someone else's stupidity. Back home, I set up a war room in my workshop. The smell of sawdust mixed with fresh printer ink as I created detailed tracking systems, penalty calculations, legal deadlines, media talking points, and collection procedures. Day 4, $40,000. Day 5, $50,000. Day 6, $60,000, officially exceeding their total assets. But the real weapons weren't legal documents, they were psychological and physical. First, the digital countdown sign. I'd learned basic electronics during my core engineering years, so building a large LED display was simple weekend work. Solar-powered, weather-resistant, and programmed to update automatically. Days HOA has violated emergency access. 7 penalties owed, $70,000 and counting. The sign went up Friday morning on a post visible from the main road. Every resident driving past got a real-time reminder of their mounting debt, courtesy of their elected leaders' war against mathematics. But the psychological masterpiece was the security upgrade I installed around the concrete barriers. Professional-grade motion sensors, infrared cameras, and proximity alarms created a high-tech monitoring zone around Delilah's concrete monument to stupidity. Every time someone approached the barriers, which happened dozens of times daily, as frustrated residents searched for solutions, lights flashed and cameras activated with audible clicks. The message was clear. This situation was being documented with forensic precision. Eleanor Martinez became my secret weapon Wednesday evening. The retired paralegal arrived with a folder full of ammunition that smelled like legal revenge and stale office coffee. "I've been researching HOA liability law for 30 years, she said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. Board members who exceed their authority are personally responsible for damages. No insurance coverage, no corporate protection, just individual bankruptcy." Eleanor's research revealed the beautiful trap Delilah had built for herself. Their HOA insurance specifically excluded intentional property interference from coverage. By voting to install barriers without permits, she'd voided their legal protection and exposed herself to unlimited personal liability. 23 families had quietly approached Eleanor, terrified that their HOA president's ego would cost them their homes. They wanted resolution before the penalties bankrupted everyone. "We're forming a coalition," Eleanor explained. "Neighbors who understand that Delilah's pride is more expensive than anyone can afford." The media strategy crystallized when Eleanor's daughter Sarah called from Channel 8 News. As a producer, she'd been tracking the story as local color until Eleanor explained the financial implications. "This isn't neighborhood drama," Sarah told me. "This is about abuse of power and property rights. Classic David versus Goliath, except Goliath is about to discover David has a legal slingshot loaded with contract law." Thursday evening, I prepared for the Friday interview by organizing evidence into television-friendly narratives. The story needed visual impact. Concrete barriers blocking emergency access, mounting penalty totals, families trapped by their own representatives' decisions. But my secret weapon was the trail camera footage I'd been collecting for weeks. Every vehicle that crossed my property was documented with timestamps, license plates, and frequency counts. School buses, delivery trucks, emergency vehicles, personal cars, hundreds of violations daily by people who had no idea they were trespassing on private land. The footage would prove that HOA residents had been unknowingly breaking the law for years, protected only by their ignorance and my tolerance. When I withdrew that tolerance, their entire community became legally vulnerable. Friday morning brought the final element: emergency access documentation. I'd researched federal regulations governing emergency vehicle response times. Blocking access that delayed ambulances or fire trucks wasn't just a contract violation, it was potentially criminal negligence if someone died during those extra 12 minutes of response time. The fire marshal had already documented 7 instances of delayed emergency response due to barrier obstruction. Each incident created additional liability exposure for the board members who voted to install them. By Friday afternoon, sitting on my porch while late sunlight reflected off concrete barriers like prison walls, I'd assembled a legal trap that would destroy Delilah's life even if she removed the barriers tomorrow. The penalties would continue accumulating until she paid every penny, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages for violating emergency access regulations. Somewhere in her designer kitchen, Delilah was probably calculating whether her pride was worth losing her house over. Delilah's desperation turned her into something far more dangerous than a petty HOA tyrant. It made her a criminal. The private investigator appeared Monday morning like a bad omen, slouching around my property in a rental sedan that screamed amateur surveillance. He spent 3 hours photographing my cabin, measuring my fence, and interrogating neighbors about my psychological stability and history of aggressive behavior. The guy had all the subtlety of a fireworks display, which told me everything about who'd hired him. Eleanor called that afternoon, her voice crackling with indignation over the phone line. "That sleazy little man knocked on my door asking if you'd ever threaten anyone. Wanted to know about drinking problems, PTSD episodes, whether you keep weapons. I told him the only dangerous thing about you was your ability to read contracts." I had to smile. 20 years of exemplary military service, community volunteer work, and a record so clean it squeaked weren't going to yield much scandal. The investigator's final report would probably bore his client to tears. But Delilah's smear campaign was just the opening act of her descent into actual criminality. By Tuesday, whispered rumors circulated through Pineview Estates like toxic smoke. According to the narrative she'd crafted, I was an unstable veteran with anger management issues, who was terrorizing innocent families over property technicalities. She'd positioned herself as the brave community leader protecting children from a dangerous neighbor's unreasonable demands. The psychology was textbook manipulation: paint the victim as the aggressor, then claim moral authority while breaking the law. Several newer residents started crossing the street when they saw me in town. 2 families installed additional security cameras aimed at my property. Even the postal worker asked nervously if everything was safe up there when delivering my mail. But Wednesday brought the moment Delilah crossed from harassment into felony territory, and she handed me evidence that would destroy her life forever. Inspector Rodriguez called that afternoon, his voice mixing professional courtesy with barely controlled disgust. The smell of fresh coffee filled my kitchen as he explained what had just happened at the county building. "Mr. Brennan, I need to report an attempted bribery. Someone offered me $5,000 cash to manufacture building code violations on your property. The entire conversation was recorded on my body camera. The details made my blood sing with anticipation. Delilah had specifically requested violations that would force emergency county access to my property, claiming it was necessary for community protection. She'd emphasized that money was no obstacle when it came to neutralizing threats to neighborhood safety. Attempted bribery of public officials carried up to 5 years in state prison, plus the kind of criminal record that would destroy her real estate license permanently. She seemed convinced that any violations would give the county authority to condemn your property access, Rodriguez continued, like she thought paying me would somehow make her concrete barriers legal retroactively. I documented everything methodically while my workshop filled with the scent of sawdust and sweet revenge. Each of Delilah's escalation attempts was creating additional criminal exposure while demonstrating a clear pattern of corruption and abuse of power. But the beautiful part wasn't the criminal charges. It was watching her political support evaporate like morning mist. Eleanor's coalition had grown to 28 families by Thursday evening, all demanding Delilah's immediate resignation. The petition cited criminal conduct, reckless financial endangerment, and violation of public trust. 3 board members had quietly retained lawyers to protect themselves from personal liability. "She's completely isolated," Eleanor reported during our coffee meeting at Murphy's Tavern. The smell of grilled onions mixed with the sound of nervous conversation as other diners recognized us from the news coverage. Even her closest allies are distancing themselves. Nobody wants to be associated with someone under criminal investigation. The smart rats were abandoning Delilah's sinking ship before the water reached their necks, but my silent preparation during this chaos would become the masterstroke that guaranteed her complete destruction. While Delilah focused on character assassination and bribery schemes, I'd been quietly documenting every single violation of federal emergency access regulations. The blocked road hadn't just delayed local services, it had interfered with postal delivery, school transportation, and emergency medical response. Each category carried separate federal penalties beyond my contractual claims. I'd also been researching the personal assets of every board member who'd voted for the barriers. Property records, business ownership, vehicle registrations, bank accounts visible through public filings. Everything they owned was now exposed to collection efforts. The television interview Friday evening provided the perfect platform to reveal just enough of this research to terrify them without showing my complete hand. "This isn't about personality conflicts," I told the camera, my voice calm while concrete barriers provided visual evidence of their criminal stupidity. "This represents a fundamental question about whether elected officials can ignore federal law, state contracts, and basic property rights because they personally dislike someone." The penalty spreadsheet made beautiful television. 9 days, $90,000 owed, $40,000 in available assets. The mathematics of this situation are quite simple. The story went viral within hours, shared by property rights groups nationwide as the perfect example of HOA corruption and overreach. By Saturday morning, Delilah owed $100,000 with no way to pay and faced criminal charges that would destroy her career, her reputation, and potentially her freedom. Desperation makes people stupid, and stupid people make fatal errors. Delilah's final week of freedom began with her creating fake social media accounts and ended with her accidentally confessing to federal crimes on live television. The digital smear campaign launched Monday morning like a coordinated military assault. Concerned Neighbor 2023, Pineview Safety Watch, and Montana Property Truth flooded Facebook with identical posts about my dangerous veteran behavior and terrorist tactics against innocent families. The fake accounts used stock photos of smiling suburbanites, but the writing style was pure Delilah, melodramatic, self-righteous, and completely detached from reality. According to her online fantasy, I was holding children hostage with surveillance equipment and exploiting legal technicalities to steal homes from hardworking families. The smell of desperation practically oozed through my computer screen as I documented each account with screenshots and metadata for evidence. But Delilah's social media meltdown was amateur hour compared to what I discovered Tuesday morning while monitoring local emergency radio frequencies. The concrete barriers weren't just delaying response times, they were creating life-threatening situations that generated federal liability. An elderly resident had suffered a heart attack Monday evening, and paramedics lost precious minutes navigating around obstacles that shouldn't exist. The fire marshal's incident report documented how barriers materially impeded emergency medical response in a potentially fatal manner. Each emergency delay created additional criminal exposure while demonstrating the human cost of Delilah's authoritarian power trip. Meanwhile, Eleanor's resistance movement had exploded into full-scale revolt. 34 families now demanded Delilah's immediate resignation, including several original supporters who'd finally realized their HOA president was gambling their homes on a legal theory she'd invented. "She's completely lost touch with reality," Eleanor reported Wednesday morning, her voice echoing in the empty community center. The smell of stale coffee mixed with industrial floor wax as she spread out petition signatures covering the conference table. Yesterday she called another emergency meeting to discuss federal intervention in local governance. Nobody came except Harvey, and even he left after 5 minutes. But my silent preparation during this chaos would deliver the coup de grace that destroyed Delilah's life forever. While she created fake social media accounts, I'd been documenting real federal crimes with forensic precision. The blocked emergency access violated not just state regulations, but federal laws governing emergency response systems, postal delivery, and interstate commerce. Every delayed ambulance, blocked mail truck, and rerouted school bus represented separate federal violations with criminal penalties far beyond my contractual claims. I'd also completed detailed asset investigations of every board member who'd voted for the barriers. Property records, business registrations, vehicle titles, bank accounts visible through public filings. Everything they owned was now mapped for collection efforts. Harvey Whitman's vintage Mustang collection, $85,000 estimated value. Janet Torres's vacation cabin, $180,000 equity. Mike Cove's small business assets, $120,000 in equipment and inventory. Combined, their personal assets could almost cover the penalties if I seized everything they owned. The spreadsheets made beautiful evidence of exactly how much Delilah's pride was going to cost her co-conspirators. Thursday brought the moment that transformed this local dispute into a national cautionary tale about HOA abuse. Channel 8's investigative follow-up aired at 6 p.m., featuring devastating footage of Delilah attempting to bribe Inspector Rodriguez. The body camera recordings captured her offering cash for manufactured violations while claiming community protection justified criminal behavior. But the real bombshell came during Sarah Martinez's live interview with Delilah outside her house Thursday evening. Confronted with evidence of fake social media accounts, bribery attempts, and mounting federal violations, Delilah completely melted down on camera. Instead of denying the charges, she doubled down with a rant about government overreach and her constitutional authority to protect property values from dangerous veterans. "I did what any responsible leader would do," she declared, her voice shaking with righteous indignation while cameras rolled. "Sometimes you have to break a few rules to protect innocent families from people who use legal technicalities as weapons." The admission of intentional rule-breaking, broadcast live on television, was the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about. She'd just confessed to criminal intent while claiming moral justification, the perfect recipe for federal conviction. Social media exploded within minutes. Legal experts shared the footage as a masterclass in how to confess to crimes while thinking you're defending yourself. Damneer property rights groups used her meltdown as proof that HOA authority needed federal oversight. By Friday morning, the story had gone viral nationally. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from CNN, Fox News, and 3 documentary filmmakers who wanted to explore HOA abuse as a systemic problem. The penalty total reached $130,000 as Friday evening approached, with Delilah's deadline for payment expiring at midnight. Her options were mathematically simple: pay money she didn't have, or face Monday's public confrontation with bankruptcy proceedings and criminal charges waiting in the wings. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Perfect weather for watching a suburban dictator's final performance before witnesses who would remember this day as the moment unchecked authority finally met immovable reality. The concrete barriers still reflected morning sunlight like monuments to monumental stupidity, but not for much longer. Monday morning, October 2nd, 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. The Pineview Elementary School gymnasium buzzed with nervous energy as 200 people filed into folding chairs arranged like a courtroom. The smell of industrial floor cleaner mixed with coffee breath and anticipation thick enough to cut with a knife. This wasn't just an HOA meeting, it was a public execution, and everyone knew it. Local news crews occupied the back rows, their cameras capturing every detail while reporters checked microphones and adjusted lighting. County officials sat in the front section, Fire Marshal Rodriguez with his violation reports, Sheriff's Deputy Morgan with arrest warrants in his briefcase, and Inspector Martinez, whose body camera footage had already destroyed Delilah's credibility forever. The residents of Pineview Estates filled the middle sections, their faces showing everything from anger to embarrassment to barely controlled panic. These were families who'd discovered their elected representative had gambled their homes on a legal theory she'd invented while watching too much daytime television. Eleanor Martinez sat beside me in the second row, her paralegal training evident as she organized documents with military precision. 36 families signed the petition for her removal, she whispered, the paper rustling like dry leaves. The remaining 11 are either hiding at home or planning to sell before this gets worse. At 9:15, Delilah finally made her entrance. She walked in wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, her blonde hair freshly styled and her makeup applied like war paint. But nothing could hide the dark circles under her eyes or the way her hands trembled as she approached the podium. Harvey Whitman and Janet Torres flanked her like reluctant bodyguards, both looking like they'd rather be getting root canals than attending this public humiliation. Mike Cove was notably absent. His lawyer had apparently advised him to maintain maximum distance from the unfolding disaster. Fire Marshal Rodriguez stood first, his uniform creaking as he approached the microphone. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the subtle whir of television cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to present findings from our investigation into illegal obstruction of emergency access routes. His voice echoed off gymnasium walls as he held up a thick folder. Over the past 11 days, concrete barriers installed without permits have delayed emergency response to this development 47 times. He opened the folder, and the pages seemed to whisper secrets as he read from incident reports. 3 medical emergencies with delayed paramedic access. 2 structure fires with impeded fire department response, 15 blocked mail deliveries, 27 disrupted school bus routes affecting 63 children. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, parents realizing their children's safety had been compromised by their HOA president's ego. Current fines total $55,000 and accumulate at $500 per day until violations are corrected. Additionally, federal authorities are investigating potential criminal charges for endangering public safety. Delilah shot to her feet like a jack-in-the-box, her voice cutting through the gymnasium air with desperate authority. "This is government overreach at its worst," she declared, gesturing wildly toward Rodriguez. "Federal bureaucrats conspiring with a disgruntled veteran to destroy property values and community autonomy." The irony was beautiful. She was claiming government overreach while facing criminal charges for bribing government officials. "We have constitutional rights to protect our community from hostile neighbors who use legal technicalities as weapons against innocent families." That's when I stood up, my movement causing a ripple of anticipation through the crowd like wind across water. "Mrs. Pemberton," I said, my voice calm and measured in contrast to her hysteria, "you've had 11 days and multiple opportunities to resolve this legally. The offer I made 6 months ago still stands. $1 per year for legal easement rights plus mutual respect." I pulled out the penalty calculation spreadsheet, holding it up so cameras could capture the devastating mathematics of her situation. Current penalty assessment under the 1987 developer agreement, $137,000. Your HOA's total available assets, $43,000. Personal liability for board members who voted for illegal barriers, $94,000 and climbing. The silence in the gymnasium was so complete you could hear heartbeats. "You can have your road back today. It'll cost exactly what your pride has cost this community. Everything." Delilah's face cycled through confusion, rage, and dawning terror as the mathematics finally penetrated her delusions of authority. The woman who'd spent months claiming moral superiority was discovering that mathematics doesn't negotiate with ego. Sheriff's Deputy Morgan stood up, his hand resting on handcuffs that gleamed under fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're under arrest for attempted bribery of public officials and conspiracy to obstruct federal emergency services." As the handcuffs clicked around Delilah's wrists with metallic finality, 200 witnesses realized they'd just watched the moment when suburban authoritarianism collided with actual law enforcement. The concrete barriers would be removed within hours. The bills would take years to pay off. But the lesson about unchecked authority would last forever. 3 months later, the concrete barriers were gone. Delilah was facing 5 years in federal prison, and Pineview Estates had learned expensive lessons about electing dictators to neighborhood positions. The HOA paid me $137,000 in penalty fees, plus $23,000 in legal costs. Money they raised through emergency special assessments averaging $3,400 per household. Most families arranged payment plans, but 3 properties went into foreclosure when owners couldn't handle the additional debt. Delilah's house sold at auction for 30 cents on the dollar. She'd fled to her sister's apartment in Billings while awaiting trial on federal bribery charges. Her real estate license permanently revoked, and her savings account emptied by legal fees. Justice tastes better than morning coffee when it's served with compound interest. I used the penalty money to establish the Property Rights Education Scholarship at Montana State University, providing annual grants for law students studying land use and HOA reform. The first recipient was Eleanor's granddaughter, who planned to specialize in protecting homeowners from association abuse. But the real change came in how Pineview Estates governed itself. Eleanor Martinez was elected HOA president by unanimous vote, implementing transparent budgeting, mandatory legal review of all board actions, and community approval requirements for any decisions affecting property access. Board meetings moved from Delilah's kitchen table conspiracy sessions to properly noticed public gatherings. The development became a model for responsible HOA governance, hosting seminars for other communities struggling with authoritarian board members. Eleanor's Common Sense Property Management workshops drew attendees from 3 counties, teaching the radical concept that HOA boards serve residents rather than ruling them. My weekends returned to peaceful woodworking therapy, the familiar smell of cedar shavings replacing the scent of legal documents and concrete dust. But I'd gained something unexpected from this whole ordeal: genuine friendships with neighbors who'd discovered that standing up to bullies creates stronger communities than tolerating them. The memorial garden I built for Sarah expanded to include a small gazebo where Eleanor and I meet weekly to discuss community issues over coffee and homemade cookies. Her late husband's tools joined my grandfather's collection, and we spend Saturday mornings building benches for the local veterans park. The rescue dog I adopted, a German Shepherd mix named Justice, greets every neighbor with tail-wagging enthusiasm, proving that even former enemies can become friends when mutual respect replaces mutual hostility. My gate remains exactly as it was, iron-wrought protection that satisfies everyone's aesthetic concerns while clearly marking private property boundaries. But now it stands open most weekends, welcoming neighbors who stop by to share coffee, swap stories, or learn basic woodworking skills. The road that caused so much conflict became a symbol of cooperation when I formalized the easement agreement for the original $1 per year, plus a community BBQ clause requiring annual neighborhood gatherings at my property. Last summer's Good Neighbor Barbecue drew 60 families, with everyone contributing dishes, stories, and laughter that echoed through the mountains until midnight. Children played on equipment I'd built while adults discussed everything except property disputes and legal penalties. This story inspired state legislators to pass the Montana HOA Accountability Act, requiring association boards to carry liability insurance, submit to annual audits, and face personal responsibility for actions exceeding their legal authority. 3 other states adopted similar legislation after my case, became a national example of what happens when suburban power corrupts absolutely. The ripple effects continue spreading through property rights organizations nationwide, with my story becoming required reading in law schools teaching municipal governance and association liability. But the best outcome happened last month when a young Army veteran called seeking advice about his own HOA dispute. I spent 2 hours walking him through property research, legal documentation, and strategic planning, teaching him that knowledge and patience defeat authoritarianism more effectively than anger and confrontation. Remember, I told him while Justice supervised from her favorite porch spot, bullies only win when good people don't know their rights. Do your homework, document everything, and let mathematics handle the revenge. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop a comment with your location and story. I read every single one and learned something from each battle against suburban tyranny. Hit that subscribe button for more stories where regular people outsmart corrupt systems using nothing but research, patience, and the beautiful mathematics of property law. Next week's story involves a landlord who thought he could steal a veteran's security deposit. Spoiler alert, he was wrong about everything.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.